Okay, so get this. Today we're diving into the entire, well, almost the entire, story of us.
Of us.
Yeah, humans, early humans, I should say. We're talking Stone Age all the way to, get this, the edge of the Renaissance.
Ambitious.
It is, right? But we've got excerpts from this, like, crazy detailed history book, so
So we're going for it.
we are from simple life to civilizations, the whole shebang.
It's quite a story when you lay it all out. Millions of years of evolution. It really makes you think about how we got from, single cells to, well, us talking about it.
Okay, but what about those big whoa moments, the ones where, like, history pivots? What should we be keeping our eyes peeled for?
Well, we got to start with the Earth itself. It wasn't always such a chill place. I'm talking billions of years ago, volcanoes, crazy heat. But then, over a long, long time, things cool down, oceans form, and that's where the magic happens.
Life 2.0. Or, well, 1.0, I guess, if
Mhm.
we're talking beginnings.
Exactly. Single-celled organisms just doing their thing. Not the brightest sparks, true. But give them credit. Those little guys, they're the ancestors of everything that came after. It took millions of years, but eventually they paved the way for the age of fishes.
Okay, hold on. Fish. Don't get me wrong. I like a good documentary as much as the next person,
Mhm.
but they don't exactly scream intelligence.
Mm.
When did things move on to land? And more importantly, when did brains get bigger?
All in good time. The transition to land, it was a process, and that's where the reptiles come in. They really hit the evolutionary jackpot.
Dinosaurs?
Dinosaurs. Over 150 million years, they were the big shots. But even giants fall, right? Something catastrophic happens, maybe an asteroid, boom, wipes them out, clears the way for, well, guess who?
Us, or at least our furry little mammalian ancestors.
You got it. They seized the opportunity. But there was this one period, the Carboniferous, the book mentions. The world was covered in these massive ferns and swamps, wild,
Giant ferns, that's a new one. Sounds kind of humid.
super humid. Imagine, like, dense, steamy swamps, these huge ferns, trees unlike anything today, insects the size of your dinner plate. It'd be a whole different world.
Okay, I'm getting Spielberg vibes here. But those ancient bogs, they weren't just pretty to look at, were they? They're actually pretty important to how we live now.
You're right on the money. All that plant matter from back then, buried under millions of years of sediment, all that pressure, it transformed. Became coal, the same coal we use today. It really shows you, even across millions of years, everything's connected.
Crazy. Speaking of connections, that shift from reptiles to mammals, that's a pretty big deal when we're talking about intelligence, right?
Huge. Reptiles, they relied a lot on instinct. But mammals, with their fancier brains, they started developing more complex social skills. Living in groups, taking care of their young, and all that interaction, well, it pushed their brains to develop even more.
That's like the groundwork for human societies. It does make you think about the dinosaurs, though. What if that asteroid hadn't messed things up? Could they have, gotten their act together socially? Could they have become the smart ones?
Now, there's a thought. It's a question that keeps paleontologists guessing. There are hints of social behavior in some dinosaur species, but
Yeah.
who knows? It's fun to imagine, though.
I, for one, am glad things turned out the way they did. Can't picture having this conversation with a T-Rex. Anyway, this brings us to the stars of our show, our early human ancestors. What was their world like? What were those first baby steps towards, well, civilization as we know it?
It's a story that never stops evolving, especially with new archaeological discoveries popping up. Take Neanderthals, for example. They were closer to us than we used to think, lived in Europe and Asia, used tools, even cared for their sick.
So not just cavemen grunting at each other then.
Not at all. And they were dealing with some tough conditions, too. Ice Age. Talk about resilience. But speaking of early humans, have you heard of the Piltdown Man?
Oh, yeah. The skull that was supposed to be the missing link, right? It's a big deal. And then
A hoax.
big old hoax. Shows you how one discovery can really fire up people's imaginations.
For sure. It reminds us, though, to be a little skeptical, always double check. The Piltdown Man might have been a fake, but it taught us to keep asking questions.
Speaking of questions, what about the rise of Homo sapiens? That's where things really shift into a different gear, wouldn't you say? From adapting to the environment to actually shaping it.
You got it. We're talking about the transition from wandering around hunting and gathering to settling down, planting crops, domesticating animals. It might not seem like much, but it changed everything.
And it happened in different parts of the world, right? Not just one place where someone decided to put down roots.
Exactly. While civilizations were popping up in the Old World, something just as amazing was happening in the Americas. Completely independently, people on both sides of the world were figuring out agriculture, building societies, even developing writing systems. Pretty cool, huh?
Hold on, stop right there. Writing. That's huge. To go from just telling stories to actually writing things down, that's next level.
It's a game changer. Think about it. The Sumerians with their cuneiform, the Egyptians, and their hieroglyphs. They weren't just doodling, they were recording their stories, their laws, their entire culture.
It's like humanity finally figured out how to hit save on its collective memory. No wonder writing is such a big deal.
Absolutely. And once you can record and share information like that, well, things get more complex. Societies trade, they interact, and sometimes they clash. Which brings us to empires.
From the deserts of Mesopotamia and the Nile to the Mediterranean Sea, kings and emperors were busy building empires. And they weren't messing around. We're talking massive armies, incredible building projects. It was a time of huge change and, let's be honest, a lot of drama.
And you can't forget about the everyday people caught in the middle of it all. Imagine living under the rule of the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, a whole different world.
A world of massive change, for sure. But before we get lost in all the empire building, I want to take a closer look at a smaller group of people with a story that had a huge impact. The Hebrews. While all this empire stuff was going down, they were developing a written tradition that's still with us today, the Bible.
Yes, the Hebrew Bible, later known as the Old Testament. It's hard to overstate its influence on Western thought, religion, even law.
It's amazing, isn't it? Something written thousands of years ago still resonates with so many people today. But while the Hebrew tradition was taking root over in the Mediterranean, another fascinating civilization was emerging, the Greeks. And they weren't afraid to challenge the status quo.
The Greeks were all about reason, democracy, art, a stark contrast to the rigid hierarchies of the empires around them.
And then there's Alexander the Great. He was like this one-man cultural blender, spreading Greek ideas everywhere he went.
Alexander's conquests were a major turning point. They ushered in the Hellenistic period, this fascinating mix of Greek and Eastern cultures.
And that led to some pretty incredible things, right? New centers of learning, advancements in art and science. It's like sometimes even conflict can lead to unexpected progress.
That's the thing about history. It's full of twists and turns, but we'll save this for next time. So last time we were talking about Alexander the Great, right? His empire really shook things up, spread Greek ideas far and wide. And while that was happening over in India, a whole new way of thinking was taking root. Buddhism.
Yeah, it's like Alexander's conquests kind of
Yeah.
reset things, opened up possibilities for new ideas and connections.
Exactly. And that blend of Greek and Eastern cultures, the Hellenistic period, it led to some amazing things. Think Alexandria, a real hub of learning and innovation. Art, philosophy, science, you name it, they were pushing boundaries.
Just goes to show you sometimes the most exciting stuff comes from these moments of like cultural fusion. But okay, Buddhism. The story of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, it's a wild one, right? A prince who walks away from everything, power, wealth, all the good stuff to find enlightenment. Talk about a life change.
You can say that again. And the amazing thing is, he didn't just keep it all to himself. He spent his life teaching others, spreading the word about compassion, mindfulness, finding peace within. It's pretty relevant, even today.
Totally. And it wasn't just some passing trend either. Buddhism really took off, became a major world religion. Just goes to show you the power of ideas. But while that was happening in the East, a different kind of power was growing in the West. I'm talking, of course, about the Roman Empire.
The Romans. Everyone thinks they know them, but there's more to it than meets the eye. Yeah, they were known for their military, but they were also brilliant engineers and had this really sophisticated legal system.
Their buildings, I mean, they didn't mess around. Roads, aqueducts, bridges, they weren't just functional, they were grand. It was like they knew, told that much power, you got to look the part.
Exactly, and their government was pretty advanced for its time. They had this system of representative government, a written legal code. It was a big change from how things were usually done, with kings and emperors calling all the shots. You could say they laid the groundwork for republics and democracies later on.
Makes you wonder about the whole empire thing, though, right? Even with all their power, all their advancements, even the Romans were immune to problems.
Yeah.
They had their share of internal struggles, external threats, and in the end, well, they fell. It really makes you think nothing lasts forever.
Very true. The Roman Empire, they had a good run, centuries of stability and prosperity, but eventually things caught up with them. Economic troubles, corruption, the constant threat of invasion. It's a reminder you can't take anything for granted.
For sure. But before we get to the fall of Rome, there's another really important development we should talk about, the rise of Christianity. It's a story that's really intertwined with the Roman Empire, but it also takes on a life of its own.
It's a wild story, honestly. Here's Christianity starting up within the Roman Empire, facing persecution at first, but then it just keeps growing. Think about it, this religion focused on love and forgiveness, spreading through an empire known for its, well, not-so-loving conquest.
Subtle plot twist. And eventually, the same empire that tried to stamp it out ends up making it the official religion. That's history for you, full of surprises. But it also shows you how powerful belief can be.
Absolutely. And it highlights this really complicated relationship between religion and political power, a theme that keeps popping up throughout history. But while Christianity was on the rise in the West, a different power was thriving in the East. The Han Dynasty in China.
I was really struck by the contrast between the late Roman Empire with all its internal problems and eventual collapse and the Han Dynasty. They were known for their stability, their cultural achievements, their control over such a vast territory. It's a good reminder that Europe wasn't the only game in town.
You got it. While Europe was going through it, China was having a bit of a golden age. Art, literature, technology, government. They were making huge strides in all these areas. Their influence is still felt today.
It makes you wonder, what if there had been more contact between the Romans and the Han Dynasty? Would they have learned from each other? Competed even harder? We'll never know.
It's one of those what-if scenarios that historians love to debate. But as it happened, these two worlds, they stayed pretty separate, each following its own path. And for the Roman Empire, well, that path led to its downfall.
Let's talk about that. The fall of Rome. It wasn't just one event. It was a process, right? Like a perfect storm of internal and external pressures.
Exactly. It was building for centuries. You've got internal divisions, a weakening economy, constant pressure from migrating groups and invasions. It all adds up. And eventually, even an empire as mighty as Rome crumbles.
People often call it the end of an era, this pivotal moment in history. But is that really true? What about everything that happened afterward? Was it really a dark age, like some people say?
It's a good question. And it gets to the heart of how we view history. It's true, Western Europe went through a period of fragmentation and upheaval, but it wasn't like the whole world just stopped. Other places, like the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic world, were having their own golden ages.
So it's all about perspective. Just because Europe was having a rough time didn't mean everyone was. Tell me more about these other centers of power and innovation.
Well, for starters, you've got the Byzantine Empire, based in Constantinople. They were really important in keeping Roman law, culture, and knowledge alive. They acted as this kind of bridge between the ancient world and the medieval period.
And the Islamic world, wow. They were flourishing.
Totally. From Spain to India, the Islamic world became a global center for knowledge and innovation. They preserved a lot of Greek and Roman learning, but also built on it, took it in new directions.
It really shows you that progress isn't always a straight line. One part of the world might be in decline, but another part is taking those ideas and running with them.
Exactly. And those moments of flourishing, they often involve taking old knowledge, adapting it, transforming it. Human history, it's all connected.
So while Europe was figuring things out after Rome, other parts of the world were keeping the flame of knowledge alive. But eventually, Europe starts to find its footing again, right?
Yeah.
What were some of the things that led to the Renaissance?
That's where things get really interesting.
So we left off with Europe kind of hitting the reset button after the Roman Empire, while other parts of the world were having their moment in the sun. But what about the Renaissance? How did Europe go from, well, where we left off, to this period of incredible artistic and intellectual change?
It's a great question. It wasn't like Europe was just sitting around waiting for the Renaissance to happen. The medieval period, it had its own thing going on.
Yeah, it wasn't all knights and castles, right?
Not exactly. You had the rise of powerful kingdoms, the development of feudalism, that whole system of lords and vassals, land ownership. And the Catholic Church, its influence was growing. It was a time of big changes, just in a different way.
And let's not forget those epic clashes between, well, basically Christendom and the Islamic world, the Crusades. Talk about a culture clash.
Intense, to say the least.
Yeah.
And they left a huge mark on both sides. The Crusades, they were driven by religion, sure, but also by this desire to control land, trade routes. It gets complicated. It reminds you that human history, it's not always pretty. Even when there's progress, there's always like this other side to it.
It's like we're always learning, always messing up, always trying to figure things out. But in the middle of all that, there were signs of change, a kind of a pre-Renaissance vibe, right? Like people were rediscovering old Greek and Roman texts, getting interested in art and literature again.
Absolutely. Thinkers like Thomas Aquinas were trying to make sense of faith and reason. Artists were experimenting. The stage was set, you could say. And then, boom, the printing press.
Game changer.
Total game changer.
Suddenly, knowledge, it's not just for the elite anymore.
Gutenberg's printing press, it democratized knowledge, made books more affordable, more available, and that led to, well, everything. The Reformation, the scientific revolution. It's hard to overstate how important that one invention was.
Seriously, talk about a ripple effect.
Yeah.
But while all this was happening in Europe, something else was going down across the Atlantic. The age of exploration. Those early explorers setting off into the unknown. You got to admire their guts.
I know, right? It wasn't just about adventure, though. It was about power, about finding new trade routes, expanding empires.
And it led to some pretty significant consequences, good and bad. Colonialism, for one. The world was never the same.
True. It's impossible to talk about the age of exploration without acknowledging the dark side of it all. But look at how far we've come in this conversation, from single-celled organisms to, well, the dawn of the modern world. It's amazing to think about.
Mind-blowing. We've seen empires rise and fall, inventions that changed the game, moments of incredible creativity. And let's be real, we've also seen humanity's capacity for, well, not so great things.
It's all part of the story, though, isn't it? The good, the bad, the messy reality of being human. And it reminds us that history isn't just some boring thing we learn in school. It's alive. It's happening right now.
And we're all part of it. Every choice we make, every action we take, it all adds up. We're writing the next chapter right now.
We are.
But for now, this is where our deep dive ends. At least this particular deep dive.
We hope you've enjoyed the journey.
Seriously, we've covered a lot of ground. And if you take away one thing from all of this, we hope it's that history. It's not just about the past. It's about understanding ourselves, the world around us, and maybe, just maybe, making better choices for the future.
Well said.
So until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep on diving deep.